Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to ask you to keep standing as we read the Word of God today. We're in the book of Exodus, and today we're in Exodus chapter 17. We'll read from verses 1 to 7 that says, "The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, 'Give us water to drink.' Moses replied, 'Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to test?' But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, 'Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?' Then Moses cried out to the Lord, 'What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me.' The Lord answered Moses, 'Go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock of Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it for the people to drink.' So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, 'Is the Lord among us or not?'" This is the word of the Lord. Amen. We may take our seats. Good morning once again. My name is Thea Jabeda. I'm part of the teaching team here at Flood, and I would love to give you the word this morning. And so we're in the book of Exodus. We've been exploring the book of Exodus, and today we're in chapter 17. So we've been looking at how the Israelites moved from Egypt we'll head all the way to Canaan, through exploring them through the book of Exodus. And really what we're exploring in this book is the idea of freedom, of walking into freedom, the freedom that the Israelites were given through them leaving Egypt. And so in this passage, we find them in the wilderness, right? Last week, we saw that God had given them manna. He had given them food to eat. And so this week, we see them grumble about water. And the Israelites are a very interesting people, because you would think that after they just had manna, they're still eating that manna, right? After God turned the bitter waters sweet so that they could drink, after God parted a whole sea for them to move through, you would think that now that they're thirsty and there's no water, their response would just be, "Hey God, we're thirsty, we need water. Would you please provide water?" No, that's not their response. Their response instead is, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt so that we can die?" How? How is that your response? You are eating manna that is falling from heaven. How is this your response, that he brought you out of Egypt to die because you are thirsty? It's a very interesting thing. And I keep saying this, I've said this at growth group before, I think if I was God, none of the Israelites would have survived, because what do you mean? I've just provided. What do you mean I brought you out to die? You are eating. You are healthy in the wilderness, and yet I brought you out to die. It feels like they're a very ungrateful people. They're people who see no good at all. What they see is just the bad. And literally in this point, it would have been a simple conversation of, "Yo, we are thirsty, we have no water." And then God provides the water. But no, they had to add in a few other things. And I think I sometimes laugh at the dramaticness of the Israelites, because this is such a dramatic thing to say. Because it's not just, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die?" It's, "You brought us and our children and our livestock to die. You brought everything out to die." And I think before exploring the book of Exodus the way we're doing it now, I've always thought, man, I probably, maybe I might not do so much better, but I wouldn't be as bad as the Israelites, I thought to myself of like, these guys were on the extreme, Like I'm saying, I look at them as very dramatic people. And I think to myself, I can't be that level of dramatic. I'm not really that level of dramatic. However, God's been reminding me this week that I am that dramatic. I behave like the Israelites. There's lots of points in my life that I behave like the Israelites. I was giving an example at growth group this week of at the beginning of the year, I asked God for a specific thing. And a couple of months into the year, my mother brought it up without me ever, telling her about it. And she said, I want to help you with this. And I was like, oh, well, look at God providing, right? And a month after we had that conversation, my mother makes a different decision. And that thing is not provided for me. Now I think to myself, the first time when I realized, this is not happening as quickly as I wanted it to, the first thought was, God will bring out a different thing, And then not even a week passed to when it just hit me where I just said, God, do you even love me? I'm doing all this work for you. I work in the church, but here I am struggling because of this one thing that could have been provided, but it's not being provided. I don't have it. And this week I thought, I am like the Israelites. I am that dramatic. Because I know God said yes, but it's the wait, it's the patience to let him do his thing in his timing that I have an issue with, that I have problems trusting. And then now it turns into, you don't love me. It turns into, you don't care for me. It turns into, so I must do things by myself. I'm trying to figure out ways to do it by myself. And it's exactly what the Israelites were doing. Instead of just asking and then patiently waiting for God to provide as he has been doing, they grumble. And they're very dramatic in their grumbling because they say, you want us to die. That's what you want. When God said, I've brought you out of slavery so you can actually live and live well. But now their whole thing is, you brought us out to die. And this is a phrase that keeps coming on and on and on. Every single time they meet adversity, you brought us out to die. Who told you that? Who told you that God brought you out here to die? And so I think the Israelites had an issue of trust. And like I said, I felt like if I was God, I would have lost patience with the Israelites. But I think there's something that God understands about the Israelites, is that there are people enslaved for so long that all they know is being in slavery. All they know is broken promises. All they know is their freedom being taken away from them slowly, gradually, until they had none. All they know is being made to do things without given proper resources to accomplish the work. That's what they know. This God who provides at every single point, they don't know that. This God who hears and answers them that quickly, they don't really know that. Because they spent so long in slavery. I came across this quote by Michael J. Chan that says, these wilderness stories demonstrate just how difficult it would be to transform a formerly enslaved people into a trusting nation. These people are coming from slavery. They don't know how to trust because trusting has led them in hurtful places. Trusting that Egypt would be the place for them led them into slavery. So how then can they just trust? They can't, because they don't know how to. And I thought to myself of the moment when I came to Christ. I, like maybe some of you, had said a prayer multiple times, because I grew up in a Christian family and I was told if you want to receive Christ, you say a prayer. But I went to secondary school and we had a lot of crusades, and every time a preacher said, who wants to receive Christ, I went. And I said, I want to receive Christ because I felt like, I'm falling short. So I did it multiple times. But when I got to college, that's when I kind of fully then started to live my Christian life. When I got to college, that's when it hit me of, you know, what I'm doing is just saying a prayer and not really changing anything else in my life. And so then I said, okay, let's try this again. But in reading this passage, I thought to myself of like, oh, I also had baggage when I came to Christ. When I came to Christ, I brought in a lot. And I brought in a lot from my own past, right? I can list a few things for you. I came in with daddy issues because my father was very absent and not a good man. I came in with mommy issues because my mother, being a good person, was juggling 6 children, and therefore there are things that fell through under the cracks. I came in with pain from having survived assaults. My heart was wounded because I had survived these things. I came in with an anxiety disorder that I didn't even have language for at the time, but it was there. All I knew is I get overwhelmed at certain points. I go through depression at certain points. That was what I came with when I came to Christ. So I also have had issues trusting. I think I relate to the Israelites more now of like, yeah, I've had these issues too. I have had trouble trusting. I have had trouble believing God is going to come through. I have a person who has often struggled with doubt. Now, my doubt is not, is God real or not? That's not a question for me. My doubt is always, will God come through for me? Do I believe or trust God for the people in my life when I pray for them? For sure, he will come through for them. I know he will. And when I pray for a person and I tell them, yeah, God's going to come through, I believe it fully. Do I believe that God is going to work through the work I do? Yes, I do. I heavily believe it. Do I believe that God is going to come through for my own personal desires and needs? Maybe, sometimes. Yes. That's where I usually fall at. Does that mean I'm not free? No. When the Israelites came out of Egypt, did that mean they were not free? They were free. But there were still things that needed work. Just like I have things that I've needed to work and are still working on. Because what we learn through the Israelites is freedom is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. You are constantly being renewed. Sanctification, you being sanctified to God, does not just happen once. There's a starting point, and then it continues. Because when we receive Christ, we unfortunately are not exempt to the things of this fallen world. Attacks will be there because we are living differently. We're still living in a world that's very corrupt, that doesn't do well. So therefore, we're not exempt from all of these things. But does that mean we're not free? No, we are free. But it is still a process. There's things we need to work on. There's things we need to do in our own lives to help us get to that place, to help us get to a place where we're not only just free from, the things, the outward things, the physical things, but also internally, because the freedom that the Israelites were now struggling with was internal. They were no longer enslaved physically, but in their hearts, they still were very much enslaved. They still had a mentality of scarcity because the entire time it was always, we don't have this, we don't have this. God's providing, but we don't have this. They're operating from a mindset of scarcity, of there is not enough. That's where they're operating from. And it's not a surprise because when they were enslaved, they never had enough. It's not like they had all the freedoms in the world in Egypt, like it was just work they were going to. No, they had to do this. Their kids died in Egypt because one man said, oh, they're going to become an army. Let's kill all the boys. They lost a lot. They endured a lot of pain. And so that is what they came out with. They met God, yes, as he brought them out of Egypt, but their hearts needed work. Their hearts needed work. And that's our story. No matter where you're from or what your past is like, we all need our hearts to have worked on. We need work on our hearts. Because freedom is an ongoing process. The question that the Israelites asked is the Lord among us or not? Very ridiculous question if you think about it. Because the Bible said there was a pillar, right? A pillar of fire at night, a cloud by day that showed them that God is with them. But the question is the Lord among us or not? Because we're going to die. Make it make sense. And I think the issue is not that they're not seeing God work. It's that the trust. They're having trouble trusting God and trusting his people, specifically Moses and Aaron, who are helping them, leading them out. Because if you remember, they know of Moses as a violent person who killed somebody. That's what they know of him. So of course, why would he keep them alive? Surely he's just going to kill them at some point. Right? They're coming from a place of lack of trust. It's not that they don't see. It's that their hearts are wounded. Their hearts are having a hard time trusting a God who is present, a God who is there, a God who is showing them, I am for you. And sometimes that's where we're at, where trust is hard. It's hard to trust that God is for us. It's hard to trust that God is with us, maybe because of where we're coming from, or even because of our current circumstances. It's like, Lord, why are all these things happening? Are you really here? Are you really with me? Because that's the question the Israelites are asking. If the Lord is among us, why are we thirsty? If the Lord is among us, why are we hungry? If the Lord is among us, why are we still in the wilderness? It's a question of trust. And I think we all go through a point where trust can be hard. And the annoying thing is God's solution to us having difficulty trusting is him saying, well, trust me. That's the solution. Trust me. And it's like, okay, but how? How then do we begin to trust this God? To trust God even when we have all of this baggage within us, when we have all this work that needs to be done on our hearts. So we trust in his ability to be God. We trust God's ability to be God. Because what the Israelites' problem is they knew man. They knew man could promise and lie. They knew man could break promise. And he has broken promise before. But they didn't know God who doesn't break a promise. They didn't know God who provides constantly. They knew man. And unfortunately, there was a projection. And within this week, another thing that I remembered was one time in therapy, my therapist said to me of when I was, explaining to her of my struggles with my faith, and she said, are you having a God problem that you're having trouble trusting God, or are you having trouble trusting man and so you're projecting that towards God? People in your life have let you down and therefore you are projecting that on God, thinking he's going to do the same. And I had to stop and evaluate. Parts of me wanted to just cut the phone and be like, you know what, I'm never going to talk to you again, woman. But she was right. There's a lot of times where we project what people have done to us onto God. So we make God out to be like he's a liar. We make God out to be like he doesn't come through on his promises. We then blame God for the things that people have done to us when it's not God. God does not lie. God is not man. When God makes a promise, he fulfills his promise. But how can we trust that if we don't know who God is? We ourselves have to learn who God is. We have to unlearn that God is not man and have to learn that God is God. Learn who he is, because that's what the Israelites had to do. What they knew is the God of their forefathers, but they needed to experience God for themselves within that wilderness for their hearts to change. They needed to experience God. And so some of us come to church because it's what our families have always done. We always go to church. It's what society expects of us. We always go to church. However, who is God to you? Do you know God? Have you taken the time to sit and learn who God is for yourself? Not because you come to church and somebody in front tells you who God is. No, but because you sit down with God and say, tell me, who are you? Who are you in my life? Who are you? We need to learn him for ourselves. Because if we can't, then we don't have any context in trusting him. The context that we have is for man, but man is not God and God is not man. So in trusting, we have to trust that God is God, and we trust him by knowing him. We trust him by knowing him. You have to know God for yourself. Learn who God is. Who is he in your life? But also, God asks us to trust his people. God asks us to trust his people. When God puts us at a place, there's always going to be somebody leading us. It's actually important to always have somebody who's leading you, because you need a pouring so you can also pour out to somebody else. So there'll always be somebody leading. But here's the thing, like we said, the Israelites have issues trusting man, and they know Moses. They know Moses as a murderer. How do they trust the murderer to lead them into a wilderness and not kill them? Even though it's irrational, because this is one man against a whole nation. But nobody said our hearts make irrational thoughts. A lot of the times it's irrational. However, it is there. We have doubts in the people that maybe God has sent for us, in the people who are there to lead us, to help us, guide us, and show us the way. And that may come from your own experience of mistrust, of your promises have been broken, you have been hurt. We all talk about church hurt. And a lot of us have probably experienced that church hurt from people who were meant to lead us and didn't do a good enough job. Instead of leading us in the right direction, they led us astray. Instead of helping us, they hurt us. And so we move with mistrust. We move with mistrust. However, I'm not saying follow people blindly. I'm not saying follow leadership blindly. That's not the issue here. The issue is to say, if God has put a person in your life who you know is leading you in the correct direction, trust God's process with that person. Trust God's process with that leadership. Because again, the Israelites say to Moses, oh, what are you doing? You brought us out here to die. They don't trust him. Because their quarrel was first not necessarily with God, but with Moses. That was their first grumble with Moses of like, see what you have done. You have brought us out here to die. They didn't trust. There was no trust with the person leading them. And again, that needed work. Because Pharaoh had done a number on them. And Pharaoh was the man leading them. Pharaoh had brought them so much pain. And here they were, needing to trust again. That's what God's asking. Trust the people he has put in your life to help you walk on this earth. Because walking in freedom means walking with others. Walking alone is not beneficial to anybody, especially not you. You have to walk with others. But how do you walk with them if you cannot trust? If you cannot trust the people that God has brought in your life? And thirdly, God's asking you to trust in his grace for your struggle. Because notice how God treats the Israelites. He doesn't shout and just say, oh, keep quiet, all of you. I've done this before. He doesn't, which he could have, because he's done so many things. However, his is patience. What he then just says is, you know what? Instead of just dealing with Moses, let's bring a few more people into it. So he tells Moses, get that stuff, but grab a few more elders so that they see what I'm doing with you. Right? And so we're bringing more people in, extra people in, so that they can help the Israelites trust a little better. Because maybe this one who has been out of Egypt for 40 years knows nothing about you. But someone else who was with you in Egypt and has walked the same journey with you, maybe you might have a better trusting with them, because it's like, oh yeah, we've been together. We have. God has patience with the Israelites, and he has patience with you and me. Because sometimes, even when God has just done a good thing for us yesterday, today when we meet trouble, we might question, is the Lord among us or not? Is the Lord among us or not? It's human nature to ask. It's human nature to focus on the negative instead of the positive that just happened. We sit in the negative, and it's so much more easy, which is why we always say it's so much easier for us to sit down and grumble about, oh, but this country's going wrong, or this guy did wrong and that one did wrong. How many times do we actually sit and say, oh, but here's the good things that's going on? Very little times that we sit down and focus on the good. A lot of the times it's the bad, because that's what comes easily. It's easier for us to stay in the negative, to be in the negative, and to ask, is the Lord among us or not? When God is there and he's there. Deep down, you have examples upon examples of what God has done in your life, of what God can do, because you've seen it in your life, in other people's lives that are around you. But somehow, when adversity comes, it's much easier to ask, is the Lord among us or not? Is God here? Does he care? Am I going to die here? It's much easier to do that, but God's asking us to trust his grace for that particular struggle. Because Hebrews 4 verse 15 and 16 says, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne with grace and confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. God empathizes with us. He empathizes with us. He gets it. He knows where you're coming from. So he has patience with you. But he's also saying, don't just sit there and say, oh, but it's because of where I'm coming from. No. We can work on the healing of your heart so that this freedom that you have received can come outwardly, can be shown outwardly to say, I have truly received God's freedom. You can approach God's throne with confidence because he has patience with your struggle. You can go to him and say, Lord, I am having trouble trusting. I don't know how to trust you for my provision. I'm left with 5 grand banki and ndia buku. I've got nothing else. And I'm having trouble trusting that tomorrow I will get food. I will get fees. I will get provision for what I need to do. You can go to him and tell him, I am having trouble trusting, because his word says you may receive mercy and find grace to help you in your time of need. But how can you go to a God you don't know? How can you go to a God you don't trust? So the question this morning is not really, is the Lord among us or not? It's, are you trusting or not? Where's your trust levels? Where are you at? Are you experiencing God from that place of pain in your life? Or are you saying, I'm going to trust you today? Because what happened, but you are God, not man. So I'm going to trust you again. His call to us this morning is to unlearn what we have learned from our past, which is bad, but to trust him with our future and our present, which he can make good, which he can provide for. He's asking you to trust. And it's hard. I know it's hard. I wish it was easy. God, I wish it was easy. But the trust we have, or rather the confidence we have, is that God himself says, and I am with you till the end of time. I am with you till the end of ages. So as much as it's hard, he is with us. He's not leaving. He is with us. So you can trust him because he is with us. So I don't know where you're at this morning. Maybe like me, you struggle with trust. But God is here. God sees you. He empathizes with you. He knows you and he loves you. And all he's saying is, hey, let's try again. Just try one more time trusting again. Because he is God and not man. He is God. So trust him to be God. I'm going to ask us all to stand as we're getting through as we're going to sing one more song together. And before we sing it, I want us to just spend just a minute talking to this God who's asking us to trust. And I want you to be as honest as you can be about where you are at in your life. If your prayer is, God, I don't know, that's enough. If your prayer is, God, I am struggling with trusting you, that's enough. If your prayer is, God, I am in pain, I am hurting, and I don't know what to do with my pain and hurt, that's enough. So I want us to just have a minute of honest prayer with God. Where are you at in your life? Talk to your Father because he is here and he wants to hear from you. Not what you think he wants to hear, but what you actually have to say. Let's just take 1 minute and just pray that prayer. God, we come to you this morning in our grief, in our pain, in our struggle, in our joy even. Lord, we come to you. That God, may you heal the pain in our lives, the places in our hearts where we're still enslaved, where we're enslaved to that pain we met. God, may you help us. May you heal us. Help us learn to trust you, to trust who you are, not who the people in our lives have been. God, may we learn to trust the people you have brought us to help us. May we trust your grace, Lord, that is very sufficient for us. That is so sufficient for us. God, be praised, be honored. We thank you that you are hearing, God. You hear us and you love us and you come to our rescue. May you be honored, may you be praised. In Jesus' name.